Joining us in Washington, D.C., Surab Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute of China-American Studies in Beijing, Huang Jing, Dean of the Institute of International and Regional Studies with Beijing Language and Culture University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. How would you respond to the latest, Mr. Gupta? 13 American soldiers died and many more injured.
It is one of the dirty secrets which has not been talked about, that in the last 2 or 3 years, the Taliban has actually been a shadow ally of the United States in hunting down IS, in providing battleground intelligence to US forces to hunt down IS, Islamic State, that is, in Afghanistan. And even while the Taliban were fighting the Afghan army, now is the time when the Taliban are in a position to impose themselves, at least in Kabul, to have that coordination with them so that the withdrawal can be more orderly. And secondly, to do away with artificial deadlines and timelines, August 31st or even 9th for that withdrawal. Do as long as it takes to move people out safely and to stem the panic in Afghanistan right now.
2 bombs exploded at different places of the airport. Now, it is known that the airport now is guarded both by the United States, NATO, and also the Taliban forces. The question really is, who should be responsible for this?
Oh, I think it's the NATO forces and the US side. They have responsibility for that area. It's just in that huge crush and of population crush wanting to get out, it's perhaps not easy to create that containment zone. And this sort of incident has happened and will occur. And there's real dangers too, because the US is now trying to extract certain people even from beyond the airport area. And that can create a sort of miscommunication even with Taliban forces. So, I mean, we are not in a good situation in this regard, and it's purely to do with the hasty withdrawal. It did not have to happen this fast.
There were already messages coming from the US side suggesting there might be danger, there might be terror in the airport area. But we can see still a lot of people are there because they're desperate to leave. So, Mr. Gupta, how do you see the fact that the intelligence could get there, but the realities are a totally different story?
On the ground, the situation is almost uncontrollable. And in this situation, you can have good intelligence, and at the same time, that intelligence is not implementable on the ground. And the US just has to understand that. And that is because of the panic that a lot of the Afghan citizens themselves feel, that if they don't get shipped out at this moment, they will never get shipped out at a later point of time. And that the US has projected the sense that it's just looking after its own interests. So it creates that much more desire to be there at the airport and be out. And that's why I keep emphasizing, if they can have some sort of a constructive arrangement with the Taliban, it can help stem the panic among Afghan citizens themselves. Don't have to be at the airport tomorrow itself, and that this process can happen in a more orderly way.
U.S. President Joe Biden once again promised that U.S. will withdraw before August the 31st. Meanwhile, he said that the U.S. will not forget and will hunt you down. He's talking, of course, of the terrorists responsible for the bombing in the airport. But Mr. Gupta, how much capability U.S. will be able to fulfill these 2 promises?
I'd say neither of the two. August 31st, I don't think is doable. And I think that's an artificial deadline put by Mr. Biden so that he can be certain that they will all be out by September 11th. So on September 11th, he can tell the country on the 20th anniversary that we are out. But that's all fine and good, but not at the expense of what is happening in Kabul in terms of human life and in Afghanistan. And I don't think, with regard to the second point, it's helpful even talking about how we will exact revenge and vengeance on these ugly terrorists. There are more important matters to deal with, which is about protecting and safeguarding life and doing that in an orderly way. It's at a later point we can think about going after the terrorists, and to do that, he needs a regional strategy. And it's not just the Lone Ranger approach that he hopes or intends to parlay. I don't think that will work.
I think that this Kabul withdrawal reflect a much bigger issue. That is, United States as a government, as a state, has been in the wrong direction. We do not see any good execution. We do not see good communication coordination among different government agencies. We see people act on their own like the headless. I think this is not a failure of Joe Biden administration. This is a failure of the entire US government in coordinating such a big event. And this is, like I said, bound to happen. You have 7,000 troops crowded in a very narrow areas without any cooperation of local authorities. There's no local governments. And you just cannot control the situation with thousands of people in that area. You said, okay, American citizens don't go to airport. If you don't want them to go to airport, where do you want them to go? They have to leave the country as soon as possible because the deadline is coming. And also, everything in the planning turned out to be wrong. They hope that the so-called Afghan government will continue, collapse immediately. Not the case. They hope that a 30 or 300,000 men strong so-called Afghan army, well equipped by American arms, weapons, or trained by Americans, will push back the Taliban. Turned out not the case. They did not consult with any member countries of NATO, their allies. They don't talk to the international communities. They just think that if we withdraw the serious troops, everything will come to equal. That's a fairy tale. That's entirely bad, very poor execution. That reflects United States as a number one power. Really have to reflect on itself. Why things went so wrong after 20 years? The number one fighting power on earth in the area, and everything goes back to square one and even worse. And now in the entire world, in front of the entire world, United States is putting up a very bad show.
Right.
And if they don't have situation under control, they change the strategy, things like that will happen again. I really, really worry. This is terrible.
I remember President Biden a few days ago when he's talking about why withdrawal from Afghanistan, such a hasty thing. He's trying to describe we've been there 20 years, the US, not for rebuilding, not for building regional democracy. We're there to make sure that America will not be attacked by terrorists and terrorist organizations. But even before the deadline, this is already happening, and this is the biggest casualty of the day for American presence in Afghanistan over the past 20 years almost.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And it also tells us about the lack of political will and political bravery in trying to resolve issues like the Afghan issue. Here's the point what I would like to make, and that is that this war was lost, I would submit, at least 10 years back, or it had at least petered out into a draw. The US could not be there indefinitely. It needed to find an arrangement, a successor arrangement that would involve the Taliban in some capacity along with the Afghan government. But the United States and this has been a perennial problem, it's too politically hard, and we are the imperial superpower, and we don't condescend and have negotiations with dirty people, the Taliban. And because there was, I would submit, 5 or even 7 years back, no arrangements made to have a successor administration in Kabul, that had to be done in haste over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And in that process, the United States did it the sequenced it the wrong way, where withdrawal was premised first and the intra-Afghan political arrangement was sequenced later. That never came about because those four was that basis on which you do it. So hard decisions need to be taken early because they create a certain path dependence, which then comes to haunt you later. And this is what has happened to you.
Huang Jing, Surab Gupta, stay with us. We'll have more discussion on the latest trip of U.S. Vice President to Southeast Asia.